Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast, and others of you are joining us on our digital platforms. I'm Philip Martin, Senior Investigative Reporter, GBH News Center for Investigative Reporting. My friend Callie Crosley has the night off. Tonight, public speaking, discourse, and debate. Historically, debate was only practiced academically by the privileged few, leaving many students of color dramatically underrepresented. However, many African-American speakers have delivered important speeches, from James Baldwin to Maya Angelou, to Martin Luther King Jr., to Malcolm X, to Barbara Jordan, to Barack Obama. Now more speakers of color are following in their legacy by joining debate teams in their communities, learning how to use their voices against social and racial injustices. Yet, as some public forums can be unsafe spaces for free speech, what is the future for people of color speaking up? Joining us this evening, Kim Wellingham, Executive Director, Boston Debate League; Lynn Yeboah, Student and Policy Debater, Harvard Debate Council; Ruth Z. Luegen, Boston City Councilor at Large; and Dr. Dion Hawkins, Assistant Professor of Argumentation and Advocacy and Director of Debate, Emerson College. Welcome, folks.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Let's get into this. This notion of debate is something I think all of us, it's affected all of our lives to a great degree, because we're all in the public sphere. And Kimberly, let me ask you this. What is, first of all, the Boston Debate League? Who are these students?
Sure. Well, we're a nonprofit organization, and we've been around since 2005. We're one of 22 urban debate leagues across the country. And urban debate leagues were founded because of the very things that you mentioned. Debate was an activity that was largely reserved for privileged people, white people, men. And so urban debate leagues were started so that young people in metropolitan cities and urban areas would have an opportunity and have access to policy debate. So we work with students from across Boston Public Schools, surrounding communities in Boston, and they come together, engage in policy debate, compete monthly, and they're pretty amazing young people.
And compete nationally. You just had a national debate in
right.
Dallas, correct?
That's right. We had some students go on to the Urban Debate National Championship.
And how'd they go?
They did fairly well. They didn't win, but one of the things I said to them at the start was have fun and learn. It's a wonderful experience for them to get to travel, but also to lose sometimes and to hear from other students who did win and take notes, find out what made their arguments more compelling. But more than anything, what's important to me is that they learn the skills. Competition is important, but I want them to learn the skills that they can transfer into other areas of their lives.
And the skills are that's part of what I want to talk about today, because when you think about the skills, argumentation, you think about civility, you think about just the very basic notion of respect, the critical thinking. And Dion, that's something you teach. So talk about the critical skills, not just about the art of speaking itself, but what comes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that question. The first thing I would say is that I believe that the skills that debate teach are more important now than ever. The ability to first be able to listen critically to both sides and still be able to understand what piece of evidence is important to use. Also, when to dismiss certain arguments, when to kick certain arguments, what arguments are working. So for me, the skills that debate teaches is, outside of critical thinking, is clarity in speaking, the ability to ask great questions. I think there's a whole portion of debate that is assessed on your ability to ask questions, thinking on the fly. I think that for me, that's a skill that can go regardless of where you are. If you think of interviews, business pitches, it's just happen circumstances, right? The ability to handle any resolution, any topic. I just think that it's such a unique activity that teaches things that is hard to teach in other ways, and it makes it a competitive environment, a fun environment, and then once you're done, you're like, oh, I actually did learn a lot.
And you've been doing it since you were 13, I understand.
Yes.
And you started in Indiana, of course.
Yes.
And Lynn, you're doing it now. You're on the debate team now at Harvard. Tell us about the experience and the competition of even getting to the debate team. I heard it's fierce.
Yes, so with the Harvard debate team, they assess your background in high school. So of course you can come on the team, but it is really hard to come on a college varsity team unless you did it in high school. So that sometimes could be a bit of a barrier. So I did it in high school for 4 years, and then I moved on to the Harvard debate team, and I've done that for 4 years as well. So I've done it for 8 years. It's just such a long time, and that experience has been very interesting. I was the only black woman at the time on the team, and it felt really challenging, and I was talking about critical race theory. I was talking about arguments that they weren't talking about. So for me, I was trying to find my way, but now the team is a predominantly black team. The Harvard Debate Council is predominantly black. So it's so interesting how the team had transformed from just me standing my ground and being on the team. So it definitely was an interesting space to navigate, especially as a young black woman from a predominantly black community. But staying on there for 4 years, I've definitely found my way.
And I want to come back in a few minutes to one of the issues you debated, critical race theory. It's one of the issues of our time. And Ruthie, before I turn to you, I'd like to talk about these young people who are learning the art of debate at the Boston Debate League. We invited 2 teams here at GBH Studios to demonstrate their debate skills. The topic: should the U.S. encourage people to eat genetically modified foods by removing the food labels? This is merely a sample of their debate style, which is really quick. Take a look.
Over 38 million Americans, 10% Americans, live in households that are struggling against food insecurity or lack of access of affordable and nutritious diet. Removing mandatory labeling will make people more likely to buy GM foods by making people less afraid of GMOs. This will increase food choice, decrease food costs, and improve nutrition.
How is just a simple label is gonna limit the things that people are buying currently?
Well, by having a label, it ends up creating a sense of fear-mongering around that label, and that deters people from buying the actual product.
So are you solving for a fear, or are you finding a solution to sort of, I guess, withhold information from other consumers?
What we're doing is finding a way to improve food access to people. That's the whole entire point of our plan.
So removing a label is going to increase food access, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
While GMO labels may be safe, there could still be long-term effects, and they also lead to use more dangerous pesticides. Brody 18. It is not possible to prove a food is safety, only to say that no hazards have been shown to exist. Among commonly expressed concerns, again, none of which have been clearly demonstrated, are unwanted changes in nutritional content and creation of allergens and toxic effects on bodily organs. Food deserts are communities, usually in low-income areas, lacking grocery stores, farmers markets, and healthy food providers. Some studies suggest that in half of all low-income neighborhoods in the United States are food deserts. High-income communities have far greater access to healthy foods than low-income communities. In fact, the high-income areas had 14 more times access to even frozen vegetables. So in communities of color and low-income communities, what could typically find in your freezer section would be frozen pizzas or ice cream, not necessarily frozen vegetables. America's hunger crisis is not due to the lack of food production, scarcity of food supply. Across the nation, households experience hunger due to a combination of factors, including limited income from jobs that pay less than living wages.
So what exactly does the negative do?
The negative is arguing that the affirmative plan does not actually cause any real-world impact, and that they're sort of focusing on the wrong things in terms of lack of food security.
What exactly are those wrong things?
We're saying that the issue isn't inherently about the food labels, and the reason why there are so many low-income families that are lacking access to healthy foods is because of things like food deserts.
The affirmative side are arguing to remove labels completely, as it creates a hierarchy that is inequitable and contributes to a national divide in American society. Having labels fails to educate the poor community and intensifies distrust between the government and people of color. This is a problem because low-income communities, people believe that they are receiving second-rate produce and will continue to buy cheaper food. So the negative side states that food deserts are a big reason why low-income families lack access to healthy food. Labels stop poor people from receiving healthy food. Here's why. Both sides argue that low-income communities do not have proficient access to food. It also notes that low-income communities do not have access to It's also important to note that low-income communities do not have access to internet and adequate education. And because of this, impoverished people are not focused on engagement in their environment and more on survival.
I am so encouraged by these students. I mean, that was amazing. The notion of debating rather than just screaming and hollering and so on and so forth. Counselor, you must find this inspiring in the work you do. And I'm not going to say in the real world, because I find that to be a problematic term. I'd say beyond academia. is what I would say. And in the city council chambers, you're a Harvard-trained lawyer. In the art of lawing, of being an attorney, you obviously find, and I know you didn't take debate, but you find it useful. Am I correct?
Absolutely, Phil. And watching our young students debate, I'm encouraged about the possibility about civility really being a cornerstone of public discourse, whether that's politics or any other public sphere. I think what we're seeing right now, especially nationally, is that disintegration of what we value, and it's that ability to have these public debates and being in public fora and having conversations and being able to defend your position and persuade others to your point rather than existing alone in silos. And I'm encouraged that we have our young students, Black and brown students, able to use their voice, find their voice, and try to persuade us, whether it's about GMOs and whether GMO labeling should be on our food products or critical race theory. I think it's critically important that we are teaching our young kids the value of debate. And so I think Kim and the work that she's doing at the Boston Debate League, because in our Boston Public Schools, we don't have that individually for our own schools, and so it takes great nonprofits like Boston Debate League to be really filling that gap.
I think you're spot on. I mean, one of the things that's pretty clear is that issues like critical race theory, excuse me, I notice that people can't really argue it. They scream about it, they talk about it, but they don't really argue it. Kimberly, this style of debate where people are speaking fast, talk about that. I mean, is that persuasive?
So here's the thing. What you saw was slow, believe it or not. And as debaters here can tell you, they were speaking slowly. And we reminded them, we want the public to be able to understand what you're saying. But the reason students do that is because they're introducing evidence. If you don't introduce as much evidence as you can into the early parts of the round, you can't speak to it later on. And so they try to get out as much evidence so that they can continue to build their story, build their argument around what they've introduced early on. So that's why they speak quickly. But as you saw, I mean, they're prepared, they study, they research, and that topic that they were arguing about is one they've been studying all year. So the policy resolution comes from the national level. So students have been arguing this year about NATO and emerging technologies. So biotech, cybersecurity, AI, artificial intelligence. And so this was just one of the cases that they ran over the course of the year. So yes.
And one of the key aspects of this, and join in as you will, but one of the key aspects of this is that you're saying they're trying to reach the truth. And when you look at a lot of argumentation today in this era of extraordinary polarization in the country, a lot of people are debating misinformation. They're not talking about facts or data or points that can be determined to be true and confirmable, verifiable. They're oftentimes taking things out of the air, made up, as we see with the former president, talking about he won the election, so on and so forth. Just makes these things up. I'd like to talk about that aspect of debate, which basically the point is to reach not a point of consensus but truth. And how do you do that fundamentally, Dion?
I'll start. So I want to say that I think that this is one of the reasons why debate is critical, because when you are a debater, you learn that there's a difference between claim, impact, warrant, evidence, right? And so I say this because people assume that if you have evidence for something, that means the argument is valid, or that means that you could say whatever you want, right? So all of that is to say, then we get into conversations about, all right, well, why does this evidence matter? So, for example, let's say we found a poll that said 61% of Americans agree that critical race theory shouldn't be taught. People would say that's the end of the argument. Debate teaches you to engage critically with that piece of research. You're going to ask about how the evidence is used. You also may ask at the root of the warrant, right? Can majority of people possibly be wrong? Have people in history in America been wrong about policy before? And so I think that question is great because that gets to evidence can tell many stories. then we've got to unpack evidence, and that is a unique skill that debate teaches that is not developed elsewhere, that I think is really important for us to highlight today.
And you must find it resonates.
Yes, it does.
And how, and especially when you're talking about something like critical race theory?
Yeah, so I think of the term tech over truth, which is the technicalities of debate over truth or versus truth over tech. That comes up in a debate. It's technical language to say, should we evaluate the technicalities of how you debated, how you talked about the claim impact warrant, how it sounded, the ethos, or should it just be the truth? And I find that both of those are necessary in debate, because you can have the technicalities, you can say, well, but if there's no truth to it, what does that mean? So I love the style of debate that you look at the cards, which is evidence, and what I've done is zoomed in on those fine parts of evidence that aren't highlighted, because you really get in to see what they're actually saying, and then you use that as an argument against them, because sometimes people are pulling evidence and they're pulling the parts that favor them, but then inside of that same piece of evidence, if you look at like the fine print, it says a different thing. So I think that that really gets into the debatability of it and how to pull from evidence and how sometimes things say one thing but mean another.
This is Aristotle. This is you're talking about form and debate, form and content rather. Yes, Rupsi, how does that work for you? For example, when you're debating policy in City Hall.
Yeah, I take what Lynn was saying, and I think it's, as a lawyer, both as someone, I started my career as a lawyer and working in Boston Housing Court, defending folks facing eviction and foreclosure. And I think about how, Kimberly, you were talking about how it's important to introduce all of the evidence in the beginning so that you can return to that. And part of debate and part of being an attorney, part of being an elected official is trying to know in advance or think in advance and incorporate in advance the arguments that the other side is going to make, to anticipate what their arguments are and weave that into your initial proffer of the statement or the position or the point of advocacy that you are trying to make, to sort of to sort of weaken their argument when they get to the stage to talk about an issue. And I think it's a game of coming to the truth. I think we are as we can see in our society, we are at a point where we can't even agree on the most basic facts, which is pretty disturbing. But a good argument, a good policy advocate is all about presenting facts in a way that are credible, backing it up with the evidence, and anticipating what the other side is going to say and incorporating that argument in, and being able to do that in a way that is civil.
Which is what a lawyer does, yes. Of course. And backing up with evidence. I mean, I'm inspired when in an age of trolls, and I'm exhausted with trolls. I'm exhausted with trolls. Exhausted.
Yeah, no.
But one of the things about debate that also is, at least is it's quite often to great oratory with singular speeches. I mean, we've seen this with Martin Luther King. Most recently, we've seen it with Justin Pearson, this young congressman. He's been reinstated to his seat in the Tennessee state legislature. He was expelled after he and two other Democrats called for gun reform. During his hearing, Pearson spoke about remaining vigilant. Take a look.
So the message for all the people in Nashville who decided to expel us: you can't expel hope. You can't expel justice. You can't expel our voice. And you sure can't expel our fight. We look forward to continuing to fight, continuing to advocate until justice rolls down like water.
Now reinstated Representative Justin Pearson, along with Representative Justin Jones, among the Tennessee Three. Again, an example of great oratory. Who else, just briefly going around the room, who else would you say inspires you in terms of great oratory?
Wow.
Kimberly.
Oh my goodness, there are lots of people. You name former President Barack Obama. He's one. Maya Angelou is another. Audre Lorde. There are lots of people who inspire me. But yeah, those are probably up there at the top.
Yeah, I was going to say Audre Lorde as well. Yeah, I love her poetry. I've actually used it a lot in debate and has used her as a piece of evidence.
You use poetry with debate?
Yes,
That's
I
fantastic.
do.
Poetry is inspiring for me as well.
I would take this a little different way. I'm really impressed by cross-examination. And so for me, a lot of times, Senator Elizabeth Warren and AOC, anytime I see them do questioning on the floor, it's brilliant. It's great. So those two for me would be who I would turn to.
Councilor Rizzi.
Well, a lot of the people that Kimberly and Lynn mentioned, of course, Audre Lorde, of course, Maya Angelou. I didn't do debate in high school, but I did declamation, which required me every term to take a piece of a speech and recite it. But I'm really encouraged, and I really enjoy watching Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson right now as our first Black woman on the Supreme Court, who herself started out in debate. The way that she questions and the way that she brings the fullness of everything of her experience, I think that's going to be something interesting for us all to watch. I think Senator Warren brings her skill as an attorney to the fore when you see her questioning, and I think that's wonderful. I think we have a lot of in the tradition of fighting for justice. Black folks in America have great examples, and as someone who's Haitian, I look at the writings and the speeches of Toussaint Louverture, of our freedom fighter. There's so many ways in which our stories, because we've been struggling, there's so much beauty in the words and in the ways that we have found to defend and to fight for our basic freedom.
This is excellent. Now, we are also in an age, and by the way, I would say another good debater is Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He's fairly amazing. But just going to a final question. This question is about what is not debatable. You have a former president, going back to Donald Trump, who talked about good people on both sides in discussing the neo-Nazi march, the Unite the Right march in Charlottesville in 2017. You have some folks in Florida who are saying that there are two sides of the Holocaust that should be debated. You have people who are saying that the rights of LGBTQ people, the rights should be debatable. I'm wondering, what is not debatable in your view?
I will start. So as a Black gay man and then 3 Black women here, I think that this is a great question for us to handle. So for me, it's anything that disrupts other people's dignity or their rights, right? Like, you have a right to your opinion. If you believe something, someone shouldn't have rights, etc. But that doesn't mean that your opinion should be accepted as universal truth, or that your opinion should dictate the policies or decisions of other people. So I always tell people I'm willing to engage in debate and dialogue on almost anything, as long as we come to the table with the same understanding that every person has dignity and respect. And if I'm debating whether or not someone is worthy of dignity and respect, I'm not interested in that conversation. I'm interested in like the equity of it and the implementation, things like that. But I don't get into conversations to prove people's worth or identity. I just don't find it to be a fruitful conversation.
And that same question, I appreciate that, Deanne. Kimberly, what your thought?
Yeah, I appreciate what you said, and I'd add to it, the first thing that came to my mind was what causes someone else harm. I'm not interested in engaging in a conversation that's going to harm someone. And when I think about the young people that we work with, I'm always thinking about when they enter into spaces, is this going to cause them harm? Psychological harm, emotional harm, physical harm. And so I think we need to be very careful about what might cause someone harm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's excellent. I agree. I think, when Dion was saying, I'm not going to engage in a debate that is about undergirding, is about stripping away someone's dignity and humanity. When I look at someone who wants to debate the Holocaust or who wants to debate the merits of slavery, why? What is your motivation? Your motivation is often, for something like that, is often rooted in maintaining white supremacist structures in our society that we must dismantle. It is not one that's rooted in trying the objectivity. It is not rooted in, just trying to have conversation. We can argue things that are important. We have so many crises on our hands. We can talk about the best way to attack affordable housing. We can talk about what are the mechanisms to really make sure that we are addressing the climate justice issues at our doorstep. What we can't debate is something that is integral about your identity and who you are when we are building a more inclusive, a more equitable, and a more just society, doing everything we can to bend that moral arc towards justice. If you're bending it the other way, you got to go.
That's right.
Indeed. Well, and we get the final word to our Harvard debater, debater. Lynn, what's your view?
Yeah, I think you all said it. I think that is just basic human rights, something that destroys someone's dignity. We can't debate those things. And one thing we haven't said is about how hard it can be for Black and brown youth to navigate debate spaces. So they shouldn't be debating those things. We shouldn't let them be susceptible to that, which is why we have to have great coaches, great leaders, great directors to help them navigate those spaces. And sometimes, for the Black youth out there, sometimes it's okay to halt that debate and say, this is too much for me if you find yourself in that situation, because it's not debatable.
It's not debatable. A lot of things are, some things aren't. Lynn, thank you very much. Dion, Ruth C., Kimberly.
Thank you.
Folks, that's the end of our broadcast and the end of our show. Thank you for joining us. Now, stay with us as we continue our conversation on our digital platforms, YouTube and Facebook.
We clutch at anything that even looks like a solution. $60 million a month for public relief. Pay it out. If it'll sweep the hobos off the streets, 1/7 of the population of the United States on welfare. Fine, as long as it ends our misery. A nation as desperate as this is a danger to itself.
Once, a Roman general brought peace to a rebellious province by killing all its citizens. Even his fellow Romans were shocked. One of them wrote, "Solitudinem faciunt pacem appellant," which means they create desolation and call it peace. Now, for all their facts and figures, the Paul Quinn debaters would also create desolation and call it peace. They would allow the unemployed to die so the economy can live. A brilliant young woman I know was asked once to support her argument in favor of social welfare. She named the most powerful source imaginable: the look in a mother's face when she cannot feed her children. Can you look that hungry child in the eyes? See the blood on his feet from walking barefoot in the cotton fields? Or do you ask his baby sister with her belly swollen from hunger if she cares about her daddy's work ethic?
That was a moving scene from the 2007 film The Great Debaters, directed by and starring Denzel Washington. The movie is inspired by the 1935 real-life debate team from Wiley College in Texas. While the movie depicted the team challenging Harvard, the real Wiley team beat the reigning champions, the University of Southern California. I'm Philip Martin, Senior Investigative Reporter, GBH News Center for Investigative Reporting. We are on YouTube and Facebook with our post show, continuing our discussion on public speaking and debate. I am curious to know how that scene, or the movie actually, impacted you, especially Kimberly, someone who leads the Boston Debate League.
It's a wonderful movie. I watched it years ago, and people still talk about it. When I say I work with the Boston Debate League, they ask, do you do that type of debate? What I appreciate about it is the power of Black voice, and that they had something to say and they stood their ground. And Lynn talked about this earlier, that sometimes we enter into spaces and we're not welcome, and they stood in that space. And so just the power of their voices, I think, is inspiring, and it makes me think about the young people we work with and their willingness to confront hard conversations, to enter into spaces, and to let their voices be heard.
Lynn, have you seen yourself in that role or in any of those roles in The Great Debater?
Yes, I have. I think their boldness really stood out to me. I think that being in a debate space where it's a predominantly white space, sometimes you're the only Black woman, or you and your partner are the only Black people. You have to be bold. You have to say what you want to say confidently and not be scared if the judge might give you a side eye or say something differently. So I think their boldness really stood out to me in the movie.
What schools have you competed against?
So many different schools: Wake University, Dartmouth, Georgetown. So many different schools. Like, there's just schools across the nation, so there's like a whole list.
And
yeah, of course, I love to chime in. So I actually had the privilege of working at Wiley College and coaching there for a year. And so this is like wild to see it. And so one thing I will say is that movie that literally, it placed debate on the map for people who didn't know anything about debate ever before, and it also resurrected the team at Wiley College. For me, the thing that sticks out to the Great Debaters is the storytelling. So for me, it was, after I watched that movie, I got so interested in storytelling as like a resistance form for Black people. And, you know, for so much of our history, we could only pass down things orally. We could only tell stories. And so for me, it was beautiful seeing the resilience, the evidence, the articulation in a format that was designed for like pop culture, right? Because very rarely do you get to see debate featured in pop culture. And so it was just an amazing experience to see debate, even better to see it centered Black debaters focusing on resistance in a movie form.
Focusing on resistance. Ruth Z, a counselor, considering if you've seen the movie, how was it instructive for you in City Hall, for example, or in a court of law?
I think it is incredibly important when you look at some of the greatest, and we saw it in the clip, when you look at some of the greatest orators and people that we've all mentioned are people that we draw on from inspiration. I think about pathos, the ability, that storytelling that you're talking about. How do you gotta do the logos, you gotta bring the rhetoric, you gotta do the ethos and the pathos of really that storytelling to really bring it home, to make it real for people. And we saw that. We saw the crowd and how everyone was like so intent when he made it real about a mother not being able to feed their child. And I think at the end of the day, sometimes we get lost in the sauce of policy or in talking about numbers. We're on the city council about to start our budget season, but these dollars and these numbers and these policies are real. They affect real people. They affect the man who spent 5 years chronically homeless, and within 4 months, my office got him housing. We think about these things that we're thinking about as abstract, and it is so important when you're debating. It is so important when you are trying to advance a policy issue to make it real for people, to make them feel it, to make them feel the importance. And I think we saw that in this movie, and in the Black tradition of struggling, of always trying to punch up. I think that's inherent in who we are, and that's why some of the greatest orators this country has seen.
No, you're on to. Oh, I'm sorry, you were going to say.
No,
okay, you're on to something in the sense. If you're just in everyday life, you're a person trying to go about your life, and you get into these discussions, debates, and you're trying to convince someone of something. What practical advice would any of you offer if you're just trying to make a point and can't seem to cut through, if you will, as we used to say in Detroit, the okie doke, and you're trying to get to a real place, evidentiary place?
So I will say what I teach students in class. So 2 things. I say if you're getting into it and you feel like it's a very tense conversation, first question is are you willing or open to change your mind, right? very rarely do people get asked that blatantly, and a lot of times people may straight up say no, but then right? This conversation may not be fruitful. The second thing that I encourage people to always say in conversations is, what experiences or evidence led you to that conclusion? Because often we get so caught up in it gets muddled really quickly, but sometimes I tell people, take a step back and just ask the question, what evidence or experiences led you to that? Then they'll break down the evidence and experiences. Okay, great. Let's talk about this experience. Is that a universal truth for people, or do you think that could be unique to you? And so I think it's breaking down and thinking about it as a process for me is really important, opposed to only focusing on the takeaway.
That's great advice. Lynn, what do you think? What advice do you offer?
I think that sometimes people tend to think about their own selves or what they want or what their community wants. So I think that sometimes putting it in the perspective of them. So maybe if they're stubborn or they don't want to change their mind, what if you were in this position? I think it's a little different when people are thinking about, oh, me and my community versus you and yours. But if I'm like, what if your community was experiencing this? What if you were experiencing that? I think that allows people to shift their focus from just themselves to think about, if I was in this situation, what would I want? What would I feel?
And even some of the most passionate issues, I'm wondering if that would be applicable. For example, if you're debating peace in the Middle East, if you're debating Palestinian and the Israeli conflict, if you're debating CRT, critical race theory, so-called, and the way it is proffered oftentimes is erroneous. So how do you deal with something that is erroneous from the very start? The very notion that critical race theory as it advanced, for example, by Governor DeSantis in Florida, is that somehow or another it's taught in kindergarten through 12th grade, and when, of course, that's nonsense. But that is a widespread belief. How do you basically cut through that okie doke?
So there are a couple of things I'll say. One, I want to go back to your first question. I remind students all the time that all of us are arguing. We all make arguments on a daily basis. And so, one, remembering that you do that. So you have a muscle. Return to that muscle that you've developed. So when you are making a pitch that you're the best person for a job, that you're the right student for a school, when you're trying to convince your parent to give you an allowance, you are building an argument, right? So we all do it. So one, just remember that you've done this before. And then think about what was the best of that argument. What did you bring with it? And then one of the things that we remind students is to attack the argument, not the person. And so going back to this question about critical race theory, those arguments often, as you said earlier, are not really about understanding. They're not about persuasion or convincing someone. They're about attacking people. That's what that is about. And so I think, one, we have to think about, what is this argument about? Start with that. Why are we having this argument, first of all? And then start to look at the evidence, start to look at the sources. Where is this coming from? But really get to what is underneath this. Why are you asking me to engage in this conversation? And then think about the humanity of people, right? Some of these conversations, whether it's critical race theory or other issues that we see right now, who benefits? Right? If we strip something away, who stands to gain? Who are we harming? So I think those are some of the fundamental things that we have to unpack. Why are we in this conversation? And then what's the purpose of it? And what are we trying to achieve? If I come into it and I know that you don't really want to hear what I have to say from the beginning, you've already decided something, why am I going to engage you? The point of arguing is not just to win or only, to win. It is really about coming to a different understanding. It is about learning something new. It is about being able and willing to consider another perspective. And so I think that when we talk about these erroneous things, you have to enter into the space kind of knowing who your opponent is and what their purpose is anyway.
No, we have such great panelists because I just find myself agreeing. I think what Kimberly said is right. If you're telling me that your understanding of critical race theory means that we have to remove books about Rosa Parks from the library and from schools, just miss me with that. That is not what we're doing, right? There's something else going on, and you are trying to uphold these systems that are anti-Black, right? Let's just be real about that. But I do think that it is important, and as an at-large city councilor, I represent the entire city of Boston, so I'm going from neighborhood to neighborhood, and I do see part of my role is, how do I let folks know that what folks want and need in Charlestown is the same, very similar to what folks want and need in Roxbury, very similar to what folks want and need in Mattapan and Beacon Hill. And yes, maybe we look different, maybe our bank accounts are different, but everyone wants a job that pays them a living wage to sustain their families. Everyone wants food on their table. Everyone wants a roof over their head. Everyone wants access to great, excellent health care. And everybody wants to be able to go and breathe free, clean, fresh air and go outside, whether that's playing dominoes outside on the front stoop or playing golf with your friends. And I think for me, I always try to, my first point is always to try to find a point of similarity. How are we similar? How are we similar before we get into that line of the things that divide us? I want you to know that we have a lot in common. Maybe you don't speak the same language, there's still a lot in common. And I think that it's just critically important to breaking down these barriers and these silos that we tend to live in, whether here in the city of Boston or in this country, because we have so much more in common. And that's why programs, honestly, like Basic Black, like public radio, public news are so important, because of how much people are able to stay in their silos by watching the TV program that suits them, or that just is going to validate what they say and what they believe all of the time. We have to find ways that we find commonalities and shared values.
You know, it's interesting. Yesterday, I saw something that was very interesting. I was covering a demonstration in Newton where a group of people had come together to oppose a drag show at the Newton North High School. And at one point I saw a 15-year-old trans girl arguing with a very vociferous woman who opposed her. And they were actually in a civil debate. It was quite interesting, and the 15-year-old was masterful, and I had to think that she had been part of a debate team. As it turned out, she had.
Wow.
Because it just is absolutely masterful in back and forth in terms of argumentation. But the core part of what came out of that, in addition to the skills, was this notion of civility. And I'm wondering, as we enter 2024, the election, we keep defining these elections as watershed, and this one certainly is, as was 2020. What issues do you think are going to be debated, critical issues are going to be debated in 2024, and can those issues be debated in a way that is civil, given the polarities of this country? We're not talking about just right, we're talking about extreme right forces in this country, and to a less degree, to a much less degree, extreme left forces in this country. But the forces of power right now are those, and the forces that the FBI are focused on right now are those on the extreme right. So I'm just wondering, what issues are we talking about for 2024, Kimberly?
I think there are lots. At the top will be gun control. I think critical race theory and banning of books and just control of public education, control of women's bodies. But I will say this, while we expect our elected officials to engage in debate, I'm inspired and hopeful about these young people who are taking it to the streets and who are calling people out and expressing their opinions, their ideas, their perspectives, and they are the ones that are going to vote. And so while there are these silos and there are these people who say, we're going to take your books and we're going to suppress and silence you, there are young people who are saying, not today, not next week, not in this next election. And so I think they have powerful voices, and I think their voices are what will prevail.
And one young person debating these issues, of course, is Lyd. And you're just about to graduate this coming year. You'll be working with a Black Voters Group this summer, I understand.
I had worked with them.
You had,
summer,
okay.
Yes.
And in that same question, what do you think the issues of the day will be, and the issue of the year in the terms of the 2024 in the upcoming election?
Yeah, I think of police reform. That's one of the first ones that came to mind. Speaking of Black Voters Matter, during that time it was 2020, so I was, in the wake of George Floyd, I was looking into just some of the different cities and states that they worked with and the police reform they were doing in those cities and states, and doing some research. And I found that there was not too much of a shift or a changing, even though what was publicly shown was the desire to shift and change. And we see that, during that time, how they dealt with the George Floyd incident really mattered, because it affects our now, in our current day, when we still see, Black youth and people of color dying in the hands of police. And I think that this is a topic that's very prevalent to Black communities. So when, in the wake of a new election, I think that Black communities are interested in what what will the government be doing about police reform? And I think that has been a consistent issue. So I definitely think that will have to make it to the next election.
Next election, Professor?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I answer the question about the issues, I would first want to say that that student is amazing, but that's an example of, as I'm sure that was an emotional toll on that student, right? And so they were a trans student, they were able to advocate for themselves. That person they were advocating, the person they were debating against, left that conversation and probably did not think twice about it. Whereas that 15-year-old child who is a great debater has to then think about how to validate or find self-worth in their identity that is consistently being policed and legislated against.
That's ongoing trauma.
Exactly,
Yes,
and I think that that's important. The other thing I want to say, though, with that is leaning into, it's very clear that the right is going to lean into trans identity as a hot-button issue for the 2024 election. And I think us that identify as allies, and thus us that identify as on the left or progressive, etc., have to be prepared for that and have to be steadfast on what allyship looks like both in practice every day and in policy. And I say that because they're very quickly framing trans as an issue of mental illness, etc., and there has just been and it had just been misproven scientifically decades ago. And then the last thing I'll say on this too, for those of us on the right, this is for me, my advocacy professor, debate brain is coming out, is we have to be careful on not allowing the right to pinpoint all of the issues, right? So it's like they get to pigeonhole where they back us into a corner to defend critical race theory or trans issues when there is a laundry list of other things that are actually issues impacting communities that are not being talked about. And that's where I also want to make sure that those of us that are advocates and allies keep that same energy on issues that are actually impacting more people and impacting communities.
And that leads me to Ruthie, the notion of not being on the defense when so many people in this country are on the defense because of the way these issues are approached.
That is right. And I think mainstream media loves the idea of these culture wars, right? That I've decided that and a lot of us have decided that we stand firmly with all marginalized folks, with our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters, with our Black and brown brothers and sisters, with our indigenous communities, with our new arrivals and our new migrants, with our disabled and differently abled communities. And you gotta make sure that allyship, like Dion said, is not just about showing up and being there and putting out a statement. It's about the work and leading on offense on those issues. So I am, as much as we see Florida coming out with every day it's something new. It's like the Rosa Parks books being taken off of the bookshelf. It's everything. It's about banning abortion after 6 weeks. All of these things that we have already fought and we have already concluded where the majority of this country stands on this. And we do need to be on the offense of how are we helping working class folks, right? People who are really struggling and increasing inequality. How are we tackling student loan debt? Those are the things that really people want us to be on the offense about, where we lead, or we show what it looks like to care for each other, to be each other's keeper. And I think that is what we have to do to resist what can often seem like these, attractive culture wars that are what gets ad buys in media. True leadership, true policy advocacy looks like what do our families need? What do individuals need to be whole? And working on that is what we have to do.
What do people need to be whole? You just raised something because this brilliant panel, and I have really enjoyed this. I want you to offer some advice to those young people who want to debate, who want to engage in these arguments, who want to join the Boston Debate League. And let's finish up what you were just saying about you were offering some advice. What advice would you offer? And I'm going to ask all of you that same question.
I'll say that our young people really are the ones leading the way. That's why the Boston Debate League is so important. When we look, it's talking about elections, when you look at the elections that just happened in 2022, the progressives and Democrats fared better than we expected because young people showed up. And showed us what the future must look like. Yeah. And so it is incumbent upon all of us to make space and make room for young leadership, for young people to continue to show us the way. Because People are fed up, and we have to look to those who are going to be on the receiving ends of climate injustice if we don't do anything. Those who want to build a more just, inclusive future. Those who actually have no problem with their trans classmate. Let's listen to them, and let's let them and make space for them to lead the way. More extracurricular activities, integrating Boston Debate League more into our schools. Our children, our Black and brown children, every neighborhood in the city, their potential is limitless, and it is our responsibility and our obligation as the adults to bring out the lens of this world so that they can shine and know that anything is possible.
Extraordinary. Lynn, for young people, even younger than you, what advice would you offer?
I would say confidence. Be confident and go for it. Being very frank, the most debates that I lost were ones that I felt insecure, that I doubted myself, that I felt like I didn't know what I was talking about, that I was looking at the judge's face and they probably were making weird faces and I just messed up my words. But then when I look back, or maybe I listened to a recording, I'm like, I knew what I was talking about. Why didn't I just keep going? I had it. So it's really the confidence in yourself. You're smart. You know what you're talking about. You've done the research. So go out there and debate.
Confidence. Dion?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So first, I will say I firmly believe that young people will change the world. I have the luxury and privilege of interacting with Gen Z on a daily, and I'm always inspired. And so for me, I would say if there are young people who want to be involved in debate, I would say the skills are only going to be more needed. You know what I mean? The ability to think critically, the ability to communicate effectively is not going to go away with the introduction of AI, ChatGPT, all of these other things, is going to be even more need for the skills. And the other thing I tell people too about debate, it can be intimidating, right? And it's a very transparent activity. You leave and you immediately know if you won or lost. There's very little things in this world that operate like it. And so I also tell people, be gracious, right? Embrace the journey, because everyone's going to lose. Everyone's going to have a bad rebuttal. Everyone's going to look back and say, I could have, should have, would have. But if you think of the journey, you think of what could I have learned after each round, that's what I say. Focus on the learning instead of the wins, because you can get a win and not learn, right?
Great advice. The journey. We're going to end that with Kimberly heading up the Boston Debate League.
Sure. Well,
Your advice to young people.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, if they're interested, we're in schools across Boston Public Schools. We're in some charter schools, and so we encourage young people to go find the debate team in their school. And if they don't find one there, reach out to us at the Boston Debate League, because we're always trying to expand into other schools. We're at bostondebate.org. But the other thing that I would say is to be confident and to know your worth, to know that you are powerful beyond measure. And so I think once we shift the narrative and help them to see how powerful they are, they will take off. They will do what they will do. And we've seen that. We saw that with the young students from the Boston Debate League in the clip. We see that in the Great Debaters. But we have examples of young people across this nation standing up for what's right, fighting for injustice. And so I think looking at those examples and knowing that you too can do that you are worthy, and that you have the right to speak up, to speak out, that you have power, and that there are people behind you who are rooting for you, who have got your back.
You are worthy. I am inspired. Kimberly, thank you very much. Rubzi, Lynn, Dion, thank you very much. This has been a great discussion.
Thank you. Thank you.